Welcome everybody to the webinar. This is a webinar about webinars, and it is part of Major Tom's Future Forward webinar series. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines a webinar as a live online educational presentation during which participating viewers can submit questions and comments. A very handsome agency guy says that webinars are not the next big thing, they are the now big thing. We're really leaning into how meta the situation is, but really Major Tom has some solid experience in this space, and we wanted to share it with you today. So let me introduce your host for the day. I'm Mitchell Fawcett, VP Strategy here at Major Tom. I would estimate that I've attended probably 20 webinars since quarantine started. Miles, how about you?
I would say that I've signed up for about 60, and I would say that I have attended probably about 20 as well, although I have watched a fair number of recordings.
Oh yeah, that counts.
Vic, what's your webinar count?
I have probably signed up to maybe around 50, and I've probably attended 10.
It's a very low conversion rate. Great. So I will walk you through what we're going to do today. We'll give you a quick background on our experience with webinars. We'll talk a little bit about how to market it, how to ensure you have really fantastic content, some of the technical nuances about delivery and execution, some thoughts on how to market your webinar after the fact, and then some thoughts on measuring success. And then a quick note as well, we will have a Q&A at the end, and we'll ask you to use the Q&A function for that, not the chat function, please. All right. So a bit of background. March 27th, 2020, here's a screenshot of the very first webinar that we hosted. And as you can see from the title, this was truly when shit really first started to hit the fan during the pandemic. We worked really hard on the content and the planning for this one, but we also had a sense of urgency to launch it really quickly. We knew that the space was quickly crowding and we wanted to get out there. So we moved quickly, we started marketing it right away, and we started slaving over the deck.
Thank you very much for taking the best possible screenshot of me for that as well, Mitchell.
I think I got a pretty good still of myself there too, yikes. So this was a big success for us though. We had almost 500 attendees and that exceeded our expectations, and it really set the bar for more. We decided to create a brand around them, calling it the Major Tom Future Forward series. And we did 4 in total. We were able to partner with Facebook, Amazon, and Salesforce. And we also did countless other private webinars or ones where we were guest speakers. Going back to how meta a webinar about webinars is, our goal today is to share our experience with you. Remote work is sure to stick around even after the pandemic is over. And the truth is we've all been on some excruciatingly boring webinars before. And we want your webinars not to suck, because there's a really good chance that this is going to be an opportunity to connect with your audience and to drive business. Over to Victoria.
Thanks, Mitchell. So to help tie your webinar efforts together, you should start off by integrating Zoom with your CRM system. For Major Tom, that CRM is HubSpot. And this integration will allow registrants to automatically be added to your CRM system and placed within your webinar workflow. Now with that set up, it is time to start on your asset needs. So to begin with, you'll need a landing page in order to provide information on the webinar and host the registration form. Now, 2 things to note with the landing page is that you have to be clear on why people should be attending the webinar and promote the hook if there is one, such as offering a free trial or a discount to registrants. Secondly, really encourage those who can't make the live event to register anyway. Let them know that they'll receive the recording and any bonus material. The main thing is that you capture as many email addresses as you can. Now, to increase your number of registrants, it's important to keep the number of entry fields on a minimum to a minimum on the form, only asking what you need from registrants to fulfill both your CRM needs and the needs of the webinar. For example, in the past, we've asked registrants what's their most pressing question on the webinar's topic. This then allows us to further refine the content, making registrants get what they came for and more. The feature image should include the webinar name, date, and time, and also a bit on the speakers. And for social media posts, it's important to tailor the copy and the image so that it matches the platform's audience. So for example, what you post on Instagram should be very different from what you post on LinkedIn. Then you also need the thank you emails and the email reminder setup. And you can also produce video ads and banner ads if you really want to help promote the webinar. Slide. So now in a webinar about webinars, here's a workflow and workflows. So the workflow, the first one you should have set up is triggered when somebody completes that contact form. This workflow will then fire out the thank you email. It will update the necessary contact fields in your CRM system and later on send out the scheduled reminder emails. Now, the next set of workflows are based on whether people actually attended the webinar or not and tailor the emails to match. We keep these as separate workflows as enrollment is based on the attendee list generated after the webinar takes place. And then from this, in order to keep nurturing those contacts generated by the webinar, it's really worth continuing to send them useful content like downloadable checklists related to the webinar's topic. And then from that, you can then finally put them into your existing evergreen workflows, whether that's for your nurture or newsletter, nurturing them until they're ready to become qualified leads. Now, with so many moving pieces, it's really important to provide a seamless user experience. So make sure that everything is tested. Test the registration form, test the workflows and see if there's any errors highlighted. And I also really highly recommend comparing the registration list in your CRM system with the list in Zoom's backend, just to really make sure that every contact has been passed over successfully. Now, with all the hard work being put into preparing for the webinar, it's really time to get the word out there. So really make sure that you leverage all relevant channels. And I really recommend promoting the webinar 2 to 4 weeks before it happens in order to gain a healthy amount of signups. So blog posts are great for showcasing yourself as a thought leader on the webinar's topic and then plugging the event within it. Hello bars and pop-ups are great for promoting the event on your website. And then you even have event websites such as Eventbrite, which is another great opportunity to promote it there. Now, getting employees to share the post is a fantastic way to promote the webinar with little to no cost. And if you have Hootsuite's Amplify, it's a great platform to help you with this. And then when encouraging any partners related to the webinar, your employees and any advocates to promote the webinar, it's really handy to provide them with the creatives, including Instagram stories, the social copy and the tracking URLs to make it as easy as possible on their end. And then some key points when it comes to the paid promotion is that most webinars tend to be B2B. So it's really worth pausing the ads over the weekend so you can get the most out of your marketing dollars. It's also very important to clearly identify who your target audience is and the geographical reach. And then finally, to really leverage audience lists. For example, you can use lookalikes. You can use visitors who have been on your website, let's say for the last 180 days. And you can also include those who have engaged on your social within 90 days. Over to you, Miles.
There we go, unmuted. Thanks, Victoria. So I'm going to be sharing a few tips for making your content, especially your slide decks, more engaging, specifically for a webinar audience. I spend more time presenting than I would like to admit to you or to myself, and I picked up a few tips and tricks along the way to make sure that my audience stays engaged. That being said, there are a few distinct differences between an in-person audience in a boardroom or an auditorium and a webinar audience that's sitting at home. The first difference that you need to be hyper aware of is that your perception of the audience and the amount of attention that you think they are paying to you is probably incorrect. You've probably spent dozens of hours preparing for a captive audience that is hyper focused on what you have to say and the immense amount of knowledge you're about to drop on them. That's super wrong. Your audience is likely distracted, multitasking. They're probably tapping back and forth between your face and some other content, and they're almost certainly checking their email now and then. Everybody who's on this webinar right now is feeling kind of guilty because I just called you out, but it's okay. It's natural. If you are, putting your content out there, you might feel a little bit frustrated by that, but it's a reality. Don't get mad. Just don't be boring. The bar for how much you have to entertain in addition to educate is much higher than it is in person. So just be conscious of the reality and start to work with it. So with that in mind, here are a few tips that I would recommend to spice up your content. The first is that less is more. Well, this is definitely a principle that is true in any presentation. It is doubly important in a webinar. There's a high likelihood that your audience can read. They don't need you to do it for them. Having these awkward long swaths of text like this will immediately cause your audience to look away. Having bullet points like this is a little bit better, but is likely going to cause your audience to read the bullet points instead of listening to you. In both cases, because you are reading, your voice is likely becoming monotonous as you read. The solution is to use graphics and illustrations to illustrate your point, but tell the story yourself. You are the content in a webinar, not your slide. Once you get a hang of this, it doesn't matter if your audience flips away for a minute, as they're getting the point from you and your voice, not your bullet points. Tip number 2 is that multimedia is like salt. It can be a bit much. I get it. GIFs are funny. They show that you are funny and that you are plugged into culture. They can break things up a little bit. You can make a comedic point. But if every other slide in your presentation has a video that needs to load, a GIF to show that you are hilarious, and a star wipe or something like that as an inside joke, your content stops being engaging and starts to be distracting. Even worse, it can start to look unprofessional. So in the words of the living legend Tim Gunn, make sure that you are editing in both written content and with GIF and multimedia usage. Less is more. Tip number 3 is one that I use a lot, whether it's on webinars or in person, and it's that tabbing is your friend. So even if you are using great graphics as visual aids, it can sometimes be pretty overwhelming to include multiple thoughts in a single slide. If I spend 5 minutes on this slide talking about all 3 aspects of the Venn diagram, as well as my love of Venn diagrams, it is much less engaging than splitting that content up. So by creating multiple slides that highlight each individual aspect of the graphic, you can talk your audience through the key thoughts individually and get better value from the overall visual aid. And a final bonus tip before I hand things over to Mitchell, despite my previous tips, your slides don't really matter. No one has ever thought back to a webinar and gushed over the quality of the slides if the presenter was a total dud. Remember, if your webinar is a movie, you're the star, baby. Come prepared, come with great energy, be your authentic self, and remember that you are the thing that everyone came to see. You're a star. Back to you, Mitchell.
Thank you. So there are definitely some technical nuances that have to be considered and are very different from in-person events, and also a few tips to use technology to make your webinar stand out. We've been big on Zoom at Major Tom for years now, so we've used it to host all of our webinars. There's certainly other alternatives out there, but we love Zoom, and we'll highlight a few of the features for you. So a couple quick notes about setting. Here we suggest that you enable a Q&A, understanding that it's one of the most rewarding parts of a webinar often. Definitely enable a practice session, which will allow you to start the webinar before you actually invite attendees in to make sure that you've got everything dialed in. And then we also suggest that you automatically record your webinar. No one will ever remember to press that record button when you're starting. You're concerned about so many other things. You can record it to the cloud or on your local computer, but you're going to want to use this video later for follow-up marketing. Another setting that we generally favor is to allow the attendees to view answered questions only in the Q&A. Ultimately, this just keeps the chat a lot cleaner and then gives the moderator better control. Zoom polls. We are going to launch one of these right now and allow you to weigh in on your thoughts here. What is the word webinar a combo of? Oh, okay, we've got 70, 80% of people have voted. Great, 100% of votes are in, and the results are completely correct. The word webinar is a combo of web and seminar. So polls are a really great way to engage people, honestly, to make sure that they're paying attention, invite valuable feedback, and just have fun. An important note here is that Zoom polls need to be loaded into the backend before you begin your webinar. You cannot do them on the fly, unfortunately. Zoom breakout rooms. So here's me having a good time with some friends of mine on a breakout room. These are a great way to allow your audience to connect with each other. You can actually do it in a webinar with up to 500 attendees, which is pretty impressive. So some tips for breakout rooms. Honestly, anticipate them being a little bit awkward to start. If this is a group that has never met before, you don't get the usual moments for introductions or that in-person connection. You do give a clear directive though. People can get right to work right away. There's no need for the small talk. If there's a clear goal and people have the right amount of time to get to it, that's great. We do recommend keeping it short and sweet though, of course, depending on the subject matter. And finally, have a really specific output. Make sure that that group has a clear directive of what to get done and then what they will potentially share with the larger group afterward. Moderating Q&As. Again, these can be one of the most valuable parts of a webinar. So we want to make sure that you have at least 10 minutes maybe built into the end, potentially more. There should always be a designated moderator. It can be really tough to be the one that's reviewing and answering questions. Depending on the subject matter of your webinar, it can be helpful to prepare some key messages and talking points in advance. You can probably anticipate the types of questions that you're getting, so it makes sense to be prepared to answer. We also suggest planting some questions in advance. So if you've got crickets from your audience, no one's asking questions, that dead air can be a little bit embarrassing. So making sure that you're prepared with some questions that the audience maybe should have been asking. And then finally, we recommend that you stop your screen share during the Q&A portion. It allows the video of you to become full screen again, and it's a bit more engaging for this more conversational part of your webinar. We love to mix things up though, and for the webinar that we partnered with Facebook for, we wanted things to be a little bit more interactive and show some innovation on our part. So we tacked on what we called live strategy consults. So at registration, people were given the chance to note their interest in participating in the sign-up form. So we vetted some of that basic information, and then we chose 2 candidates from there. So we connected with them over email to get a bit of a better understanding of what their biggest social media marketing challenges were. Then toward the end of the webinar, we invited each of them as panelists to jump on video, share their stories, and then we had a really good rewarding conversation where we helped to lend some perspective to some of their challenges. So you can kind of think of it as like a call-in radio show kind of style. So we chose scenarios purposely where we knew that we could dig in and discuss information that would help the rest of the audience too. So the results allowed us to add a little bit of variety to the webinar, keep things fresh, and also to connect with some potential new clients. Next, the importance of a technical rehearsal. So the day before your webinar, when all your content is ready, we suggest a full run through. Then everyone who's a host can understand, make sure that their background, their lighting, and their sound is good, making sure that their monitor and camera setup is good. Most people these days have a dual monitor setup. Make sure your notes are on the screen that your camera is on so that you can speak directly to your audience, not to your second monitor. Make sure it's clear who has the presentation controls. Make sure they're clear on when to advance the slides and if there's any builds. And then make sure you've got your speaker notes ready and clear. And finally, decide who's going to handle the Q&A moderation. So right before your webinar, we suggest sending a calendar invite for about 15 minutes before. Give your team a little pep talk, make sure everyone's feeling good. Have that presentation screen loaded. And then when you do enable practice mode, there's going to be a very big and very tempting orange button to press at the top. I used to try and get it out of the way and dismiss it, but that's actually the button that will allow your attendees to join once they're in the waiting room. So make sure that you are very ready for that. All right, back to Victoria.
Thank you, Mitchell. So congrats on doing the webinar, but next is all the content marketing that comes after it. So the first thing you want to do once the webinar is over is grab the recording and edit it. Edit the beginning and the end so it has a more polished feel. And if you have branded intro and outro cards, that's even better. And then once that's saved, upload it to YouTube and also send off the video to rev.com so you can get the captions in order to follow SEO and accessibility best practices. Now, they might take up to 24 hours to get back to you, but just make sure when that happens to quality check the captions and then upload it to YouTube. So while that video editing is being done, it's also important to grab the webinar registration and attendee list once it's been generated in the back end and create the attended and no-show lists in your CRM system. Once the video has been added to the follow-up emails and the enrollment lists have been set up, it's now safe for you to turn on your follow-up workflows. When it comes to repurposing content, you reap what you sow. Webinars provide a lot of valuable marketing content if you put the time and effort into it. So, creating downloadable resources are great because they can help registrants put what they learned into practice. For example, you create checklists, frequently asked questions, or worksheets. These are all great pieces to include within the webinar nurture stream. And by using HubSpot's CTA buttons, you can even track users' engagement with these downloads and have it count towards their lead scoring. You can create blog posts, series, or ebooks depending on the length of the content, and you can upload the presentation deck to SlideShare. Now, mini soundbite videos and quotes are great for shareable content across social, and you can even embed the recording into blog posts or other platforms where you might have a company profile. Our too long didn't watch strategy is one that we crafted out to continue to generate leads and to get people to sign up to watch the webinar when it happens. Why not do the same for those who see it later on? So we created a number of assets to put this plan into action. So this is an example of the first teaser video that we created.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We often find that when we start to work with an organization and we ask them to define their brand strategy, it's hard to get a clear answer. The golden circle is Simon Sinek's articulation of the purpose of an organization. Project number 2 is to either develop or redevelop your personas. Part of your personas will remain the same, and that'll be this part up at the top here. Demographics and geographics, but what they think and feel and do, those will almost certainly have changed.
Project number 3, do some SEO spring cleaning. Google Analytics. First of all, if you don't have this or something similar, this needs to be your Monday project. Project number 4, focus on your content. At Major Tom, we've had some really great, rewarding workshops internally and with clients using the Mural app.
This one's about reimagining your delivery. How can you make changes now that are going to open up new avenues and new opportunities, both now and in the future? So our 6th project is one that lots of people push off, whether that be updating GTM or GA implementations, as Mitchell mentioned, or if you want to put on more advanced tools like heat mapping or user recording tools like Hotjar or Crazy Egg.
Sustain your brand presence. Our recommendation is to implement a brand awareness campaign that's supported with paid media.
Start to build your relaunch plan. No recession lasts forever, and this one will also pass. Are you going to start small to determine ROI for a specific channel in the new environment, or are you going to bet big on one specific channel?
So when the video ad ends, the lead gen form appears, letting them know that the full webinar and bonus downloads are available. Once they've completed the form, they'll get access to this in a landing page and receive the same content within an email. So here you can see that we've even included timestamps to really, reduce any friction, make it a better user experience, and allow the user to jump to the parts of the webinar that they thought was the most interesting and can download the same resources there as well. So this is the first one we tested out, and we really saw super results from it, generating a high number of leads within the first week. Over to you, Mitchell.
Great. So measuring success. If anyone watches the show Succession, you'll know that the guy on the next slide here takes a bit of an aggressive approach to business. The fact that we're even using a GIF in a webinar is a good indication that we don't take ourselves quite as seriously, although of course we do like our work to be effective. So for your webinar, start by defining what success means to you. Is it truly that lead capture? Are you aiming for more top funnel awareness? So set goals based on that. Also remember that webinars are a long game in many ways. Your goal will often be to just get your foot in the door, and that's when the work really begins with that longer term nurture. Always making sure that you're tracking your efforts is important. So we use HubSpot's UTM parameters to make sure that we track every source and understand which ones are most effective for future webinars. And then finally, make sure you always remember why people are attending webinars in the first place. They're there to learn. You're there to market to them and hopefully earn them as a client. But ensure that you're providing that value and ultimately remembering that we're trying to educate, inform, inspire, to capture people in the long run. I want to thank Miles and Victoria, everyone who helped put this webinar together, Liz and Lynn as well. I want to thank everyone for attending and anyone who may be watching this recording in the future. Thank you very much. We hope you learned something, and we look forward to seeing your webinar soon.